Remember when, when we were kids, like the street lights would come on, and that meant it was time to go home, and it felt like safe, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. The world felt predictable back then. And these days, it feels like every time you turn on the news, it's like ripped from the pages of some kind of true crime novel.
It can be a little unnerving, that's for sure.
It's unsettling, especially, I think, for people our age. We're not kids anymore. We've seen a thing or two.
We have a little more life experience under our belts.
Exactly. So these stories, they don't just feel like entertainment. It hits a little closer to home now.
Right. You start to think, could this happen in my town, to my family?
And that's why we're here today. We're diving deep into 3 cases that have frankly, left a lot of people feeling shaken.
Cases that raise a lot of questions.
Yeah. We're talking about, first, a teenager accused of killing his entire family, like wiping them out, his parents, his siblings. Then we'll look at a teacher, an elementary school teacher, whose actions in the classroom are just beyond disturbing.
I mean, this is a place where children should feel safe.
Exactly. And then we'll unpack the story of these wealthy brothers. They're living these double lives. And man, you won't believe what they were up to. Seriously, jaw-dropping stuff.
These cases definitely get under your skin.
But, we're not just here to just rehash the headlines, like we're reading some gossip brag or something.
We want to go deeper.
Yeah. We want to understand the why. What would lead someone to even think about committing these kinds of acts? What pushes them over the edge?
I mean, are there warning signs? Can these tragedies be prevented? Those are the questions that keep me up at night.
Me too. And just as importantly, what can we learn from these cases?
Exactly. How can we protect ourselves, our families, our communities?
Yeah. Because the world does feel, I don't know, more unpredictable, more dangerous. So how do we navigate that? How do we stay safe?
It's about awareness, it's about understanding the risks, and it's about being proactive.
Okay, so let's get to it. To help us make sense of all of this, we've got our expert here. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. And yeah, I agree, these cases are disturbing. But, as we said, they offer these really valuable insights into human behavior, into societal pressures, and just those hidden cracks that are in our communities that maybe we don't always see.
Right. So let's start in Belen, New Mexico. It's a town that most people had probably never heard of before this.
Quiet, small town America.
Exactly. But then this horrific crime happens, and suddenly it's in the national spotlight.
For all the wrong reasons.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So picture this. It's an ordinary morning, right? People are going about their day. The sun is shining. The birds are singing. It's a normal day.
Peaceful.
And then a 911 call comes in. But what the dispatcher hears on the other end of the line, it's anything but ordinary. It's chilling. It's a 16-year-old boy, Diego Leyva. And he's confessing to the unthinkable. He killed his father, Leonardo, his mother, Adriana, and his 2 younger siblings, Adrian and Alexander.
A whole family gone.
Just wiped out. And it was Diego who made the call.
And that's one of the things that makes this case so unusual and so disturbing.
Right. I mean, what goes through someone's mind to do something like that and then just calmly call 911?
It's almost like he was in shock or like detached from reality.
Yeah. And that's what the experts are trying to figure out, right?
Yeah.
What was his mental state at the time of the crime?
Exactly. Was it premeditated? Had he been planning this for a while?
Or was it impulsive?
Yeah.
Did something trigger him?
And then, of course, there's the issue of alcohol. Reports indicate that he had been drinking.
Ah, so maybe that played a role.
Possibly. Alcohol can lower inhibitions, make people act in ways they wouldn't normally.
Right. And then there's the biggest question of all. How did a teenager get his hands on a gun?
That's a question we ask in almost every case like this, isn't it? The accessibility of firearms is a major concern.
Totally. I mean, how can we prevent these tragedies if guns are so easily available?
It's a complex issue. There are many factors at play. But certainly, responsible gun ownership and safe storage are crucial.
Absolutely. And, to add another layer to all of this, the people who knew Diego, they described him as a pretty normal kid.
Like there weren't any glaring red flags. He wasn't some loner or outcast or anything like that.
A former teacher even said he was a good student. And that's the thing, right? It's enough to make any parent think, am I missing something?
Could something like this happen in my own home? Those are terrifying thoughts.
They are. It makes you wonder, are there any warning signs? Can we really know what's going on in the minds of our children, even the ones who seem well-adjusted?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Mental health struggles, especially in young people, can be so hard to detect.
They're like chameleons. They blend in,
Exactly. The signs aren't always obvious.
and they manifest in different ways, depending on the kid.
Absolutely. So, we may never fully understand what drove Diego to do what he did.
That's true. But it does highlight something crucial,
It does. We need to talk about mental health more, openly and honestly.
especially with our kids.
Yes. We need to create environments where they feel comfortable coming to us to talk about their struggle.
To ask for help.
Exactly. We need to let them know that they're not alone.
That it's okay to not be okay,
Yeah.
and that there's help available.
That's so important.
Yeah. It's a sobering reminder that darkness can hide, even in places that seem peaceful.
Even in the places we think are safest.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit now. Let's talk about a place where every parent expects their child to be safe, the classroom. But for one 9-year-old boy in New Jersey, school became a scene of terror.
And it was allegedly at the hands of the very person who was supposed to protect him,
His teacher.
his teacher.
It's the case of Todd Lewis. He was an elementary school teacher, and he's now facing charges of endangering the welfare of a child.
Serious charges.
Yeah. And the allegations, I mean, they're just shocking. Lewis is accused of restraining a 9-year-old boy to his desk with masking tape.
Masking tape.
Yeah. But it wasn't just his hands or his wrists, like a playful kind of thing.
No, this was something else entirely.
He allegedly wrapped the tape around the back of the boy's neck and then secured it to the desk. I mean, come on, a 9-year-old?
It's unthinkable.
It's beyond disturbing.
Yeah.
And to make matters even worse, there was a teacher's aide in the classroom.
Another adult.
Right. Her name is Celia Ann, and she allegedly witnessed the whole thing and did nothing.
Didn't intervene, didn't report it, nothing.
I can't even fathom it. How could someone, especially someone in a position of authority, do something like that?
It's a complete betrayal of trust. And the fact that another adult was present and didn't stop it, it's mind-boggling.
It is, and it makes you question, what's going on in our schools? What kind of training are these people getting? What safeguards are in place to protect our kids? It's terrifying.
It's a nightmare scenario for any parent.
Totally. Because, we send our kids to school every day expecting that they're going to be safe, that they're going to be cared for.
Right. We trust these institutions with our most precious possessions.
Exactly. And when that trust is shattered, it's just devastating.
And this case really highlights that. It highlights the need for greater vigilance, for stronger protections for children.
And for accountability. These people need to be held responsible for their actions.
Absolutely, and that's why the charges against both Lewis and Celia Ann are so important.
Right. It sends a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated.
That there are consequences for violating the trust that's placed in educators.
And it's not just about punishment. It's about prevention, too. How do we make sure that something like this never happens again?
Right. How do we create a culture where children feel empowered to speak up if they're being mistreated, where they know that they'll be listened to, that they'll be believed?
That's such a critical point, because often kids are afraid to speak up.
They are. They may feel ashamed or embarrassed or afraid of retaliation.
Exactly. So we need to encourage them to talk to us. To tell us if something is wrong, no matter how small it might seem.
And we need to listen without judgment.
And believe them.
Yes, because their voices matter.
All right, so we've talked about a family tragedy, a betrayal of trust in the classroom. Now let's move on to a case that exposes the dark side of wealth and privilege. A case that reminds us that sometimes the people who seem to have it all are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Ready for this one?
Hit me with it.
Okay, so meet the Alexander brothers, Oren, Aylin, and Tal. Successful real estate brokers, living the high life, luxury apartments, extravagant parties, connections galore.
Sounds like they had it all.
They did, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. But behind this glittering facade, well, there was a secret brewing. A dark and sinister secret.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the secret?
These brothers, they weren't just successful businessmen. They were allegedly running a sex trafficking ring.
Wow. You're kidding, right?
Nope, I'm totally serious.
That's insane. How does that even happen? How do you go from being a successful real estate broker to running a sex trafficking ring?
That's what's so crazy about this case. It's like something out of a movie. These guys were living these double lives.
And no one suspected anything.
Apparently not. That's the thing about these kinds of crimes. They often operate in the shadows.
Right. Hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so difficult to stop.
And it's even more difficult when the perpetrators are wealthy and influential.
Totally. because they have the resources to cover their tracks, to silence their victims, to intimidate anyone who might try to expose them.
And this case is a perfect example of that. The allegations against the Alexander brothers are truly horrific.
I mean, it's just sickening to think about what they allegedly did to these women.
It's a case of pure exploitation. They used their wealth and status to lure vulnerable women into a world of promises.
Promises of a better life, right?
Exactly. They dangled luxury as bait. First-class travel, exclusive events, access to a world most people could only dream of.
It's like a classic predator tactic, right?
Oh.
Preying on people's desires, their vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. They create this illusion of a dream life. But the reality is a nightmare.
And for these women, it was a nightmare. They were allegedly drugged, assaulted, threatened, trapped in a cycle of abuse and control.
And they were silenced by fear, by the threat of exposure, of retaliation.
It's heartbreaking.
It is, and it highlights the insidious nature of sex trafficking. It can happen anywhere, to anyone.
And the perpetrators are often masters of manipulation. They know how to groom their victims, to gain their trust, to make them feel like they have no other options.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to talk about this, to raise awareness, to educate people about the signs of trafficking.
Because knowledge is power. The more we know about these crimes, the better equipped we are to prevent them, to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
And to support the victims, to let them know that they're not alone, that there is help available, that they can escape this nightmare.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute. What can people do? I mean, if someone suspects that someone they know is being trafficked, what should they do?
The most important thing is to reach out. There are hotlines, websites, organizations that are dedicated to helping victims of trafficking, and they can provide guidance, support, and resources.
And what about reporting it to the authorities?
Absolutely. If you have concrete evidence that someone is being trafficked, it's crucial to contact law enforcement. They have the resources and the expertise to investigate these crimes and bring the perpetrators to justice.
And it's important to remember that the victims of trafficking are not criminals.
They are victims. They need our compassion, our support, and our understanding.
Exactly. We can't blame them for what happened to them.
We need to treat them with dignity and respect, and offer them the help they need to heal and rebuild their lives.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. 3 very different cases, but all with a common thread. The abuse of power, the exploitation of vulnerability, the devastating impact of these crimes on the victims.
And they all raise questions about what we can do as a society to prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place.
Exactly. So I think this is a good place to take a break. We'll be back in a minute to delve deeper into these issues.
To talk about solutions and what we can all do to make a difference.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Okay, so we've talked about some really heavy stuff, and I think it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed, to just want to turn away from all the darkness. But I think that's when we need to fight that urge to disengage. We have to, lean in,
Yeah, I agree. We can't just bury our heads in the sand.
Right. We have to face these uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
Because that's how we start to change things.
That's where the conversation begins. That's where we start to find solutions.
Exactly. So I want to ask you, our listeners, what really resonated with you in these cases? Which one got you thinking the most or worried you the most?
Yeah, what really hit home for you? And why?
And I think it's important to think about, how these stories, how they reflect on us as a society. You know what I mean? What are these cases saying about who we are and what we value?
Right. Are we doing enough to protect the vulnerable? Are we addressing the root causes of these problems?
Yeah. And what can we as individuals do to make a difference, to make the world a safer place?
Those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves every single day.
They're big questions.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's no easy answers. But I think the first step is just acknowledging the problems, talking about them, not being afraid to have these tough conversations.
Exactly. We can't solve problems if we pretend they don't exist.
Right. And silence. Silence only helps the people who are doing these terrible things.
Yeah.
The abusers, the exploiters, the predators.
Silence is their best friend.
It is. So we need to speak up.
Yeah.
We need to share our concerns. We need to demand better for ourselves, for our children, for our communities.
That's how we create change, by raising our voices, by holding people accountable.
Exactly. And remember, you are not alone in this.
There are people out there who care.
There are resources available. There are organizations dedicated to fighting these injustices. There are communities ready to support those who've been affected.
You don't have to face this alone.
We'll make sure to include some helpful links in the show notes so you can check those out.
And don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need help finding resources. We're happy to connect you with the right people.
So let's talk solutions. What are some concrete steps we can take to address these complex problems? Let's start with, I think, the case of Diego Leyva and the whole issue of youth mental health. It's something we don't talk about enough.
No, we don't, and it's a huge problem. Mental health challenges are so common, especially among young people.
And the statistics are scary.
They are. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young people.
It's heartbreaking. And so many kids are struggling with anxiety, with depression. They're suffering in silence.
And that's the tragedy. They think they're alone, that no one understands.
Right. And they're afraid to talk about it.
Exactly. They're afraid of being judged, of being labeled.
So how do we change that? How do we create those safe spaces for young people to talk about their mental health?
It starts with us, with adults, with parents, educators, community leaders. We need to be having these conversations with young people, openly and honestly.
Without judgment.
Exactly. We need to be listening, really listening, and we need to be offering support.
And we need to be aware of the warning signs.
Yes. Changes in behavior, withdrawal, expressions of hopelessness, those kinds of things.
And if we see those signs, we need to act.
We need to know how to connect young people with professional help.
Right. Because sometimes it's more than we can handle as parents or friends. Sometimes they need professional help.
And there's no shame in that.
Absolutely not. It's like if your kid breaks a leg, you take him to the doctor, right?
Exactly. Mental health is no different. It's a part of our overall health, and it deserves the same level of care and attention.
So we need to advocate for more mental health resources in our schools, in our communities. We need to make sure that young people have access to the help they need when they need it.
Absolutely. Early intervention is key.
Okay, so we've talked about mental health. Now let's turn to the case of Todd Lewis and the whole issue of child protection in schools. This case, I mean, it really shook a lot of parents.
And I get it. It's every parent's worst nightmare.
To think that your child could be abused by the very person who's supposed to be taking care of them, it's just unimaginable.
It's a betrayal of trust at the deepest level.
So what can we do? How do we make sure our kids are safe when we send them to school every day? How do we protect them from predators like Todd Lewis?
Well, I think it starts with being proactive, with being involved in our children's schools, with knowing who's working with them.
Right, like not just dropping them off the curb and hoping for the best.
Exactly. We need to be engaged. We need to be asking questions. We need to be paying attention.
Right, what about background checks? Are those enough?
They're a start, but they're not foolproof. We need to go beyond background checks. We need to be looking for other signs.
Like what?
Like, how do teachers interact with students? Are they respectful? Are they attentive to their needs? Do they create a safe and supportive environment?
So it's about being observant.
It is, and it's about trusting our gut instincts. If something feels off, it probably is.
And we need to teach our kids to do the same, to trust their instincts.
Absolutely. We need to empower them to speak up if something feels wrong, if someone makes them feel uncomfortable.
And we need to listen to them, believe them.
Yes. And we need to take action.
Report it to the authorities, if necessary.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about mental health. We've talked about child protection in schools. Now let's move on to the case of the Alexander brothers and their alleged sex trafficking ring.
A case that exposes the dark underbelly of wealth and privilege.
And reminds us that these crimes can happen anywhere, even in the most affluent communities.
And that the perpetrators can be anyone, even people who seem to have it all.
Right. So how do we combat a crime that so often operates in the shadows? A crime that preys on vulnerability, on desperation?
It's a tough question, but I think awareness is key. We need to educate ourselves about the realities of sex trafficking.
About how it works. About the tactics traffickers use.
Exactly, and about the signs that someone might be a victim.
Because often the victims are hidden in plain sight.
They are, and they may be afraid to come forward.
So what are some of those signs? What should we be looking for?
Well, look for signs of control. Someone who seems fearful, anxious, withdrawn. Someone who's always accompanied by another person. Someone who has unexplained injuries.
Or who seems to be living in unsafe conditions.
Right. Those are just a few potential indicators.
And it's important to remember, like, trafficking isn't always what we see in the movies, right?
No, it's not always about kidnapping or physical force.
Yeah.
Often it's much more subtle.
Traffickers can be very manipulative.
They are. They use psychological coercion. They make promises of a better life. They prey on people's vulnerabilities.
And they often use social media to groom their victims.
Absolutely. Social media has become a major tool for traffickers.
So it's important to be aware of that, to talk to our kids about online safety, to monitor their social media activity.
And if you see something that seems suspicious, don't be afraid to report it.
Right. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay, so these 3 cases, as different as they are, they all highlight something really important.
They do. They highlight the complexities of the world we live in.
The fact that darkness can lurk even in the places we think are safest.
And that we all have a role to play in making our communities safer.
In protecting the vulnerable and speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves.
And demanding justice.
Okay. So, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Yeah, it's been a heavy conversation.
It has. But I hope you're leaving here feeling, I don't know, empowered.
Informed, engaged.
Yeah. Because knowledge is power. And the more we understand these issues, the better equipped we are to fight them.
To make a difference.
Exactly. So, thanks for joining us. And we'll be back next week with another deep dive into the stories that matter. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. And hey, if you found this deep dive valuable, hit that subscribe button. We're all in this together, right?
We are, and we'll get through it together.
But, even with all this darkness, there's still hope, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's always hope.
I mean, these cases, as awful as they are, they spark conversations.
They do. They get people talking.
They raise awareness. And they kind of push us, I think, to demand better. For ourselves, for our kids, for our communities.
I think that's a really important point. We can't just be passive observers. We have to be active participants in creating a better world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, our listener, what really stuck with you from these cases? Which one, made you think most or worried you the most?
Yeah. And what questions did it raise for you?
And how do you think these stories, how do they reflect the challenges we face as a society?
Yeah.
What are they saying about us?
Yeah.
About our values?
Yeah.
About where we're headed?
Right. Are we creating a world where everyone feels safe and valued? Or are we leaving some people behind?
Yeah, those are tough questions. And there's no easy answers.
Yeah.
But I think, like we said before, the first step is just acknowledging the problems, talking about them, refusing to look away.
Right. We can't solve problems if we pretend they don't exist.
Exactly. And silence. Silence only helps the bad guys. The abusers, the exploiters, the people who prey on the vulnerable.
Silence protects them.
It does. So we have to speak up. We have to share our concerns. We have to demand better. For ourselves, for our children, for our communities, for everyone.
That's how we create change.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are resources available, there are organizations dedicated to fighting these injustices, and there are communities ready to support those who've been affected.
You don't have to go through this alone.
Right. And we'll make sure to include some helpful links in the show notes so you can check those out. If you need support, if you need help, please reach out.
There are people who want to help. You just have to ask.
Okay, so this has been, a really heady deep dive. But I hope you're leaving with a sense of, empowerment rather than despair.
I hope so too.
Knowledge is power, right? And by understanding these issues, by talking about them, we can start to address them head on.
We can be the change we want to see in the world.
Exactly. So thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the stories that matter. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. And hey, if you found this deep dive valuable, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We're all in this together, Raiz.
We are, and we'll get through it together.